Hey, this week before we get started, I wanted to give a shout out to thisoldgame.com. They make some of the best reproduction artwork for classic arcade games out there. Please support them, support your local small businesses. They don't endorse me, but I just think they're great. So check out This Old Game for all your reproduction needs for artwork for your games. Hey there, Cassandra here, the vintage arcade gal. And this week we have an exciting show because one of our final projects is finished, and that's our Jungle King cocktail. Taito of America made a couple of dedicated cocktail cabinets, Quicks, Frontline, Wild Western, and Jungle Hunt / Jungle King. But they're all pretty rare. Quicks being the most popular out of the bunch. They just didn't really make a lot of cocktails or cabarets per se, production numbers wise, but I have no idea how many. They never released the numbers, but I would bet Quicks they probably made about 1,000, and the other titles well under 500. You just don't see them very often. Now for the other project updates, behind me you can see the Arkanoid, still kind of naked with no artwork, but the artwork is on the way, as well as the game behind it. Donkey Kong, we have the side art coming for it, which means we need to start thinking about our painting booth. And I've decided I'm going to use a portable greenhouse to make a painting booth. It seems like the best option. So probably start ordering that stuff next week, and probably not next week, but the week after that we'll have our painting booth, and we'll see what happens with that. Other updates, The Simpsons. I got the wood ordered and delivered, but I'm still waiting for my table saw to arrive, which should be here next week. So we should maybe have some kind of cool stuff to use with the table saw and the biscuit joiner to fix the Simpsons cabinet finally and get that one well underway as well. I also ordered another new game, which is crazy. eBay is a dangerous thing, but we'll take a look at that. Hopefully by next week we'll have it. And I've been also making a scale model HO Railroad with my wife to kind of pass the quarantine time, keep ourselves sane and busy. So that's been kind of a fun thing. I have no idea where we're going to put it when it's finished, but it's starting to look pretty good. So anywho, let's take a look at our Jungle King cocktail, which is right upstairs. But first, it has kind of an interesting history, Jungle King. So let's dive into the history of Jungle King / Jungle Hunt for a bit, because I think you'll find it pretty fascinating. Before we talk about Jungle King, we really need to chat a bit about another game. In 1981, Nintendo released the instant classic Donkey Kong across the world. The platform-style gameplay was a unique gaming experience in a time when the arcades were mostly populated with space shooters. The success of Donkey Kong sent competing companies into a frenzy to develop their own platform-style games. These games ranged in quality and originality greatly, with none of them really able to recreate the huge success of Donkey Kong. Most of these games follow the formula Donkey Kong had set, however, with 4 different levels of gameplay, a climbing to the top to rescue someone or something on each level, and a jump and dodge style of player control. By the early 80s, Taito was one of the biggest arcade game manufacturers on the planet. This success was built on the foundation of arguably the first true arcade smash hit, Space Invaders. Space Invaders was released in the USA by Midway, but soon after the global success of the game, Taito decided to manufacture and distribute their own games in the United States. In 1981, Taito would release 18 arcade games, mostly in their home market of Japan. For the US, they didn't have a platform game like Donkey Kong of any kind quite yet. The big hit for Taito in 81 would be the unique land grab puzzle game known as Quicks. Taito, like almost every other major game manufacturer, wanted their own Donkey Kong style game. In 1982, Taito developed a jungle-themed 4-level game that combined both the platforming style of gameplay like Donkey Kong with some ideas from some other popular games like RAM's Moon Patrol into a game first named Jungle Boy. Jungle Boy would be renamed to Jungle King to capitalize on its Tarzan look-alike main hero. Not only does the pixel hero look like Tarzan, he even gives out a digitally produced Tarzan yell at the start of the game. The theming is clever and makes great use of the Tarzan imagery. There was only one problem. Tarzan was a copyrighted character, which Taito had not attempted to gain the copyright permission to use in the game. Up until this point, many manufacturers of arcade games and pinball machines had had a bit of a fast and loose approach to other companies' copyrights and intellectual property. Even though companies would ruthlessly copy other games and rebrand them as their own, as Atari would find out early on with a multitude of Pong clones. Many early video games would use theming, imagery, or direct rip-off ideas from well-known copyrighted material or popular culture items. As the 80s rolled in, the video game industry had become so large, whatever free pass they had had for this copyright infringement seems to have gone away. Taito also ran into maybe a bit of bad luck with choosing Tarzan as something to copy. Tarzan was created by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Tarzan's first appearance was in the novel Tarzan of the Apes, first published in a magazine all the way back in 1912. Burroughs passed away in 1950, but his creations of Tarzan and John Carter of Mars continue to be licensed and protected by copyrights by his estate. In the 70s, there was a bit of a Tarzan revival going on. Marvel Comics had introduced a new comic book series. Filmation Animation Studio had produced a new Saturday morning cartoon. And in the early 1980s, 2 feature films were released. Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated, the holding company to this day of the Tarzan and John Carter copyright and trademarks, has been involved in countless legal actions for years over the rights of these characters. To this day, they are still actively involved in several lawsuits, despite the fact that most of Burroughs' original work has expired and is now considered to be part of the public domain. Burroughs Inc. had been on a bit of a suing spree in the early 80s, mainly due to the 2 major MGM movies that were made. Jungle King was released in early 1982 and would go to be a decent hit for Taito. The multi-level gameplay and colorful graphics drew in arcade patrons. There's some nice parallax scrolling in the first level, and the music is fairly catchy as well. The hardware design shares a lot with other Taito arcade games of the era, including the classic game Elevator Action. Taito released the game in an upright cabinet, a cabaret cabinet, and in a cocktail. There are 4 levels of gameplay, including jumping from vines, swimming in crocodile-infested waters, running and jumping over boulders, but they kind of look like meatballs, and finally rescuing the girl from angry native warriors. After completing the 4 levels, they start again, but of course the difficulty ramps up. The second wave of levels also incorporates some new obstacles such as monkeys on the vines and more agile crocodiles. Almost immediately after its release in arcades, the estate of Burroughs sought legal action. Now here's where the story gets a little hazy despite years of stories from arcade fans and magazines. I couldn't find any official court documentation of Taito officially being sued by the Burroughs estate, but it does seem they sent a cease and desist letter from the estate. There is no record of damages being paid or an actual legal court case, because there probably wasn't one. It seems Taito immediately took action not to get sued. Jungle King was quickly retooled and retitled to a new name, Jungle Hunt. Gone were the Tarzan yell and the Tarzan-like main character sprite, and a few other graphical elements. Tarzan was replaced with a Dr. Livingstone British explorer type character, and some new music was added, but overall the gameplay was exactly the same. The upright and the cabaret arcade game cabinets in the USA received new and somewhat more generic artwork. The cocktail machines kept the odd, fancy Taito cocktail artwork. The name change didn't seem to affect the success of the game. In fact, the media attention over the lawsuit might actually have helped the game in some way. Production numbers are not available, but it seems that Jungle Hunt versions of these arcade games are more common than the Jungle King version. I would bet the overall production was around 65% Jungle Hunt and like 35% Jungle King overall, with cabaret machines and cocktails having much lower production numbers compared to the upright machines. Home versions for home video game machines and home computers were released worldwide. Atari would release most of these versions through their short-lived Atari Soft computer software division for home computers. The versions vary in quality and authenticity compared to the arcade version pretty greatly. Strangely, the underpowered Atari 2600 version is one of the few versions of the game that attempts to recreate the arcade's parallax scrolling on the first level. Taito would rework the game yet again in 1982 with the release of the game Pirate Pete. Pirate Pete keeps the same 4 levels of gameplay, but reworks the graphics to a pirate theme. The graphic overhaul for Pete is much more dramatic in scope when compared to the changes of Jungle King to Jungle Hunt. It's unclear if Pirate Pete was an attempt to push further out from the Tarzan comparison or create some sort of pseudo-sequel to the original game. Pirate Pete was both announced and marketed by Taito for the US market. It seems, however, the game was released only in a very limited fashion in the USA. The game PCB board is fairly rare, and I couldn't find any other collectors who have a dedicated cabinet version of the game, despite photos of it being in Taito's catalog of the era. Maybe Taito knew they had milked the concept as much as they possibly could and decided to move on to other games. The legacy of Jungle King is interesting not only as a game, but as a symbolic end of manufacturers of amusement devices from taking copyright infringement lightly. Ironically, Jungle King was a commonly bootlegged PCB board throughout the world in the early 1980s. The Jungle Hunt version is a common fixture in Taito greatest hits compilations for modern systems, and today is considered to be one of Taito's most successful arcade games from the early 1980s. Alright, so here we are. Here is the Jungle King cocktail by Taito, and it's not a direct restoration, mostly because this top glass is not original. This is something I designed for this game. I had a real hard time finding anyone who had any kind of scan or original version of that kind of swirly cocktail glass, that we'll get into a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But let's talk about just kind of how this cocktail is designed. The first thing you'll notice, it's kind of big for a cocktail. In fact, compared to the Asteroids Deluxe cocktail right next to it, which is not the most eloquently designed cocktail either, the Taito design cocktail is actually 4.5 inches wider and 3 inches deeper than the Atari one. The riser legs will also allow this to rise all the way up to standing level, although it's a little wonky if you do it that way. It's just kind of a beefy, very basic box design. It was almost like someone told Taito to design a cocktail cabinet and they just drew a box and that was it. The monitor is only a 13-inch little monitor, despite just how much space is inside this thing. Getting inside one of these Taito cocktails is pretty simple. It's just a little lock door underneath the first player control panel. It comes down and there's your main CPU and the filter board and all the other wiring that goes to things like the power supply and the monitor. These filter boards that you see here, pretty common on Taito games from this era. And there's our 4-stack Jungle King CPU. And it's a pretty neat little package. There's just a lot of space inside this cabinet. There's the mechs for the coin mechs. We have our little 13-inch Electro Home monitor. That's where the power supply would have normally been. Taito power supplies are notoriously terrible from this era, but you can kind of see it there. There's a switching power supply now away in the back of the machine. And there's our control panels that we sanded down, got rid of the extra holes. I put yellow buttons on there just to match the yellow T-molding I put on, which might be controversial. But the monitor is in pretty darn good shape. I recapped it, rebuilt it. It's just a shame that the monitor is so small. Here's the first player and the second player start buttons and the coin reject, all built in. These buttons actually push down to light up. It's kind of a neat apparatus there, pretty neat buttons. and there's the coin return right on the side. So to close it back up again, all you do is push in the little latches, lower the top glass, and then you have to relock it with the little mechanisms. There's little swing arm mechanisms in the bottom here that clamp it down. They're a little wonky, for lack of a better word. It might just be age. And then you lock up your front, and then you're ready to go. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. It's not a complicated design. So we're going to use our time machine here. This is some old footage when I first got this game. You can see it's pretty filthy and dirty. I bought this from a fellow collector because it had been converted into an elevator action. And I bought my upright elevator action actually the same weekend I had it delivered. So I ended up having 2 elevator actions, and I really didn't know what to do with this thing. It's just filthy. And it wasn't working. It was in just terrible, terrible condition. So I went through a couple cycles of trying to figure out what to do with this thing, either turning it into some sort of elevator action cocktail, which it had been converted to, or to try to turn it back into Jungle King. The biggest challenge with turning it back to Jungle King was this Taito top glass artwork, which just seemed to be impossible to find. For the better part of a year, I kind of went round and round with what to do with it, and trying to seek out somebody who had just a scan of this original kind of swirly, fancy top glass, and I couldn't find anything. A lot of people have Quix cocktails, but unfortunately, because Quix is a vertical monitor instead of a horizontal monitor, the artwork is actually somewhat different and not necessarily compatible with the Jungle Hunt / Jungle King. So this board you see in here, this elevator action board, gosh, what a mess this thing was when I got it. I actually ended up repairing this board. And so now I have a backup elevator action board, which is nice for the upstairs machine, just in case that one ever seems to falter. There you can also kind of see on the left the original power supply of this game. Now, I decided to just kind of grin and bear it. And there you can see the non-working old elevator action board that was just a mess. I designed my own top glass. I got a piece of glass cut, and then I had the folks from Escape Pod make me a vinyl underlay for the Jungle King, which is what you see upstairs now. And I was very happy with it. I designed it to kind of mimic the cabaret artwork the best I could. And then a funny thing happened soon afterwards. So about 2 months ago, I put a APB out to pretty much every arcade form I could think of to try to find a scan of this top glass. And pretty much when I had given up, I got contacted by a collector named Jen, who had found a Taito top glass on what had been converted into a trivia game. And she sent it to me, and I bought it from her, and she packed it in the greatest packing I've ever seen in my life from anything I've ever gotten on eBay. And voila! We now have the unobtainium top glass piece for Jungle King. And it's not in the greatest shape, but it's complete, and it's going to make a magnificent donor for a restoration, so we can scan it, restore it, make reproductions of this piece of glass finally, which have not been available by any other means. So I'm just really, really excited to have this available to everybody who might need it. So I think that just goes to show you that networking and patience with other collectors, it's really critical in the arcade game collecting, probably any hobby really. Finding those other collectors who may have that piece that you've been looking for, especially for a rarer or harder to find game. So what we plan on doing with that top glass is I'm going to scan it, save it in Photoshop as a high-res vector file, so anyone who needs it in the future for reproduction will have it, since it hasn't been available before, at least by any means that I've seen. And then the top glass, I have this polishing compound and wheel that I just dropped, this buffing wheel. And what we'll do is we'll buff that top glass. We don't want to buff the bottom of the glass where the artwork has been adhered, because we might end up destroying the artwork, but the top will get rid of those scratches. People use these a lot of times for classic cars. I know pinball and jukebox fans they use this kind of stuff as well. So that's pretty much it. I hope you're safe out there and practicing social distancing. Make sure you're listening to scientific, rational evidence with everything going on, and not giving in to emotion, which I know can be difficult, or to crazy people. Never listen to crazy people. That's just good advice. So happy hunting. Next week we'll have a new game hopefully to look at, a finished Arkanoid hopefully, and some progress with the Simpsons and the Donkey Kong. So until then, I'll see you later. Happy hunting and stay safe, and order yourself a pizza or something. See you later.